Each person you'll meet tonight is a leader and pioneer in their field. These farmers were farming organically long before it was popular and even before there was a standardized USDA organic program. In fact, the people you'll meet tonight helped create some of the standards and advocated and educated to create the organic movement we have today. You'll also meet researchers who are bringing the organic movement and practices further into the future. Tonight's webinar is the first in a three-part series this spring, with webinars also on March 17th on the Organic Systems Plan and process of certification, and March 31st on record keeping. I need to let you know that this work is supported through the United States Department of Agriculture's Transition to Organic Partnership Program. TOPP is a program of the USDA Organic Transition Initiative, and it's administered by the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service National Organic Program. The first half of tonight's webinar will be a brief refresher on what specifically we mean when we talk about organic agriculture, and the Cliff's Notes version of the history of certified organic agriculture and our National Organic Program. You will also hear the story of the development of the organic movement here in North Dakota, told by the farmers who were there and created that movement. I've reserved the remaining hour and 10 minutes for discussion with our panelists, and I'll make sure that there are opportunities for questions from the audience. So let's begin. Start with, what is organic agriculture? We've spoken with our FARRMS interns before about organic agriculture, and we talk about three definitions to the word. The first being the definition we may have learned in high school biology, relating to or derived from living matter or being carbon-based. Another way we use the term organic is to speak broadly about a natural systems approach to agriculture. But tonight we're focusing on USDA certified organic production. In other words, a package of agricultural practices that have been accepted as meeting established standards, which have been codified into federal law, and a system by which farmers verify that they are following those standards and using those practices. I think the average consumer's understanding of organic is that if they purchase food with the organic seal, it is free from synthetic chemicals. While the standards do include prohibited and allowable substances, in reality, organic agriculture is so much more. The USDA organic regulations describe organic agriculture as the application of a set of cultural, biological, and mechanical practices that support the cycling of on-farm resources, promote ecological balance, and conserve biodiversity. These include maintaining or enhancing soil and water quality, conserving wetlands, woodlands, and wildlife, and avoiding use of synthetic fertilizers, sewage sludge, irradiation, and genetic engineering. Organic livestock production also includes standards for animal welfare, such as ensuring grazing livestock have access to pasture during the grazing season. In 1990, Congress passed the Organic Foods Production Act. This act mandated creation of the National Organic Program and the National Organic Standards Board. The National Organic Program went to work to develop regulations applicable to organic certification, and 12 years later, in October 2002, the National Organic Program final rule went into effect. The National Organic Program defined organic agriculture as organic production is a production system that responds to site-specific conditions by integrating cultural, biological, and mechanical practices that foster cycling of resources, promote ecological balance, and conserve biological diversity. Today, USDA certified organic agriculture here in the US is governed by the National Organic Program. But what came before? How did we reach this point? And what is the history that brought us here? So farming in harmony with nature is nothing new. These are practices that have been used since the birth of agriculture. Indigenous communities across the world were practicing agriculture and managing their environments in ways that produced food while maintaining a healthy ecological balance. Indigenous cultures have long used practices that would now be considered organic, such as intercropping, terracing, mixed cropping with legumes to increase reliance on biological fertility, and agroforestry. In North America, one example of intercropping practices was the Three Sisters method of intercropping corn, squash, and beans used by Buffalo Bird woman, Hidatsa woman in the late 1800s. An anthropologist interviews this Hidatsa woman and describes how the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara raised huge crops of corn, squash, beans, and sunflowers in the rich bottomlands of the Missouri River near Like a Fishhook village, which is now underneath Lake Sakakawea. Have not read this book. I highly recommend it. It's available online to read for free, and it even includes recipes on ways that they cooked these crops. Modern scientific studies of this Three Sisters model show it to be an efficient way of using nutrients, water, and light. So here's Buffalo Bird Woman's garden. Another example of traditional farming practices that were a precursor to organic agriculture was something called Vedic farming. India, as we know, is one of the cradles of civilization and one of the birthplaces of agriculture. Ancient Indian texts called the Vedas contain a wealth of knowledge about agriculture and farming. Vedic agriculture is a holistic approach that incorporates traditional knowledge and practices from the Vedas. It places a strong emphasis on soil health, but the practices also include using cow manure as fertilizer, crop rotation, and intercropping to increase biodiversity. It also includes the use of Ayurvedic herbs to promote plant growth and health, and Vedic mantras chanted during planting and harvest. But the first set of practices is similar to what is now incorporated in today's organic standards. Around the turn of the 20th century, an English botanist named Albert Howard was sent to India to serve as an agricultural advisor and was in charge of a government research farm. He observed and came to support the traditional Indian farming practices and preferred them over conventional agricultural science. He brought these ideas of soil health and holistic farming practices back to the UK and later published a book called An Agricultural Testament, which is a classic in organic farming literature. He emphasized the importance of maintaining humus, the organic rich part of the soil, keeping water in the soil, and the role of mycorrhiza. And his teachings helped found a soil health movement in the UK known as humus farming. Another pioneer of organic farming was Lady Eve Balfour. She co-founded and became the first president of the Soil Association, an international organization which promotes sustainable agriculture, and was one of the UK's main farming advocates. She published a book as well called The Living Soil in 1943. She said, "We cannot safely separate human health from the health of farm produce, whether animal or vegetable. All have their origin in a fertile soil." I also need to mention someone from the US, George Washington Carver. He was the first Black student at Iowa State Agricultural College. And while he's most remembered for his work with peanuts, he also did a lot of research in organic agriculture and natural farming systems. In the late 1890s, when he was at Tuskegee University in Alabama, he pioneered systems of crop rotation, natural fertilizers from swamp muck and compost, and natural livestock pest control methods such as feeding acorns to hogs, and taught these methods to the local farmers. And finally, we come to J.I. Rodale. He was originally from New York City. He owned Rodale Manufacturing, which made electrical equipment, and he had founded a press which marketed books and magazines. He encountered the teachings of Sir Albert Howard and developed an interest in promoting a healthy lifestyle that emphasized organically grown foods. Rodale established the Rodale Organic Gardening Experimental Farm in 1940. In 1945, he wrote Pay Dirt, the first American book on organic gardening. He founded the Soil and Health Foundation in Pennsylvania in 1947, which is today the Rodale Institute. The Rodale Institute today is probably the leading organization in the US promoting organic agriculture. So from 1947 till today, as the Rodale Institute was being founded in the 1940s, industrial agriculture was increasing, as were the effects of industry and unregulated chemical use. In 1962, Rachel Carson published the book Silent Spring, raising the alarm on the harmful effects of chemicals in the environment, specifically the effects of DDT, a common pesticide used for insect control. In 1969, an oil slick in the heavily polluted Cuyahoga River near Cleveland, Ohio, caught fire. In response, the environmental movement was born. The public raised an outcry about the state of the environment. And in 1970, the National Environmental Policy Act was passed, the Clean Air Act was first passed, and the EPA was created. The first Earth Day was celebrated that April. The Clean Water Act was passed in 1972, and the use of DDT was banned in the US. In 1973, the Endangered Species Act was passed. So it's against this background in the 1960s and 70s that organic farming gained visibility as environmental awareness increased, and the public became increasingly concerned about pesticide use. The growth of the organic industry during this era led to the establishment of standards and third-party certification. As the organic industry expanded during the 1980s, different certifiers developed their own standards and certification processes. And as a result, there was some confusion as some certifiers did not accept the validity of organic certification by other certifiers. This resulted in barriers to trade, which led many to believe that a consistent set of standards was needed, a single set of US standards for organic production, labeling, and marketing. And so now we've come full circle. This resulted in the creation of that National Organic Program by an act of Congress in 1990. And finally, the National Organic Program standards went into effect in 2002. So I'm going to pause there because now it's time for you to hear this story of how this story played out here in North Dakota from the farmers who were there and participated in this. And I'm delighted to see that David has been able to join us. He's part of this story. Terry Jacobson is going to share the story of how North Dakota's organic movement began with a group of sustainable farmers in the late 1970s. He will be joined by David Podol and Brad Brummond. All three farmers lived this cultural transformation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for the moment, and I'm going to give you the floor, Terry. And if you want me to share these slides of the NPSAS brochure, you just let me know when I should share them.
Okay. Shall I start by telling a little bit about our farm?
Terry, I think you're still muted.
I can hear him.
Oh,
Hi, David.
Oh,
Hi,
you're
Terry.
good. Okay. My sound turned up. Go ahead, Terry.
Okay. Our farm is in Cavalier County, coldest county in the state. And that has effects on organic farming in the sense that it diminishes some of the options that we have in terms of selecting alternative crops and developing a more complex crop rotation. Janet and I chose to go organic, and I say that very purposely because I don't know that I would have been strong enough to make the decision and to go it alone if Janet hadn't believed in organic farming as much as I had. And so we decided that that was the best way that we could take care of the land, was to do it organically. And really, the organic farming is the environmental movement in agriculture. Our farm was 640 acres, and when we started, it was all in cropland. But gradually, as we were involved in organic farming longer, we introduced livestock, and so that we had both sheep and cattle, and that makes organic farming easier, to have livestock as part of as a couple of the enterprises in the overall system. I guess one other thing I would say is, as you begin to understand the principles and how to do it, organic farming is way more fun than conventional farming, because you're interacting with the land and emphasizing positive things, and as you begin to see the land responding to your organic management, it's just really rewarding and satisfying. Okay, shall I go into the perspective on early organic farming, or do you want to hear about David's farm? This is one of the nicest organic farms in the state.
Why don't we let David and then Brad each introduce themselves briefly, and then I'd love to hear the story of how in the late 1970s organic farmers came together to form an association.
It's pretty dynamic.
So David, would you briefly introduce yourself and your farm?
All right. We began farming organically in 1975, mostly in a response to a Rodale publication, some of J.I. Rodale's writings. And I thought it was not only intriguing, but it was more or less a revelation for me. So the crops that we've raised over the years were rye or triticale with hairy vetch, oats, wheat, a specialty millet, buckwheat, vegetable seeds, and a lot of different green manure crops we've raised: hairy vetch, sorghum sudan, sweet clover, red clover, and we've experimented with a lot of other different species. In the process, we've done quite a few research projects with university folks over the years, and we're currently hosting a project on prairie restoration. We have experience in poultry production, and my avocation, I've always said, was gardening, home food production, plant breeding, and seed saving. But I've always thought the garden is an integral part of the farm. It's where we raise our food. It's where we learn most intimately about agriculture, about farming. But what has driven me most is my agrarian philosophy, that perspective. Some of the things that have helped me understand is books like Small is Beautiful, Wendell Berry's writings, Rodale Press stuff, various religious writers, God's stewardship directives in the Old Testament prophets, and, like people from Masanobu Fukuoka, David Klein, an Amish farmer, Aldo Leopold, Liberty Hyde Bailey, and texts like the standard texts like The Nature and Properties of Soils. And so our venture into organic farming has been very philosophically based. Well, I guess that's about all I have to say.
Okay, thank you, David. Brad, would you introduce yourself briefly as well? And I'll have the others introduce themselves in a little bit at the beginning of the panel.
Well, I'm Brad Brummond. I came to organic farming relatively late as far as you two gentlemen are concerned. I got into organic farming in 1988. And no, I'm not a researcher, and no, I'm not a farmer. But my role in organic agriculture was to try to provide more information, try to provide programs, try to provide leadership. And then one of the greatest fights of all was to get organic agriculture accepted at our land grant university. And back in my day, being the quote unquote organic guy was not always the thing to be in some circles at that. And I think Terry laughs. It's yeah, you can laugh, but it wasn't funny as far as I was concerned. So I helped a lot of I started in Kidder County. It had one of the largest bases of organic farmers in North Dakota. And I came up through OCIA. And then I got involved with Northern Plains Sustainable Agriculture Society. And I think the only office that I didn't hold in that organization was treasurer, because my wife doesn't let me have the checkbook, so why would I have yours? So I did a lot of that. I served on several national boards. I served on North Dakota Organic Advisory, where we talked about practices and laws that affect organic agriculture. I found the organic producers and the people involved in organic agriculture to be very heartwarming, very genuine people. And I think that's what bonded me to them, because I have to admit this. I joined organics as a cynic, okay? I had the classic NDSU education, okay? So cynicism was part of that, okay? But it was the people that taught me. I can say I was taught organic farmers not by the university, but by the organic farmers themselves, which made what I learned in my advice very practical. And
Can I interrupt a minute, Brad?
what's that?
Brad, can I interrupt a minute? Brad is a true county agent. I think a county agent is supposed to find answers to the questions that farmers bring to them. And Brad has done that. Not all county agents have done that. Some county agents have perceived their role as making agriculture safe for the conventional system. But you have answered whatever question came up, and it's part of what led you to become an expert in organic. So, I mean, that is deeply appreciated, Brad.
Well, I guess if I've achieved anything, I'm the sum of what you taught me, so I'll blame you. I guess that's about what I have to say there. I would like to hear, I've heard some of Terry's stories, David and Terry's stories about the early days, but I never tire about hearing them. I think we need to get into that.
Yeah. So Terry, you told me that there was a gathering in the late 1970s. Could we start there?
I have a preface to that. David's actually going. I've asked David to tell the very origin story, but to set the stage, at the time when we were trying to figure out organic farming, conventional farmers perceived organic agriculture to be a return to the past. It was defined by what farmers didn't do. No pesticides, no fertilizers, no fungicides, no GMO. This definition represented to conventional farmers their worst ideas about what organic was, because the people that didn't do those things had all kinds of weeds, and they were an example of a bad farmer. So that is sort of the context that we were operating in. And when I told my brother who was farming that I was going to go organic, we went round and around. He tried to persuade me not to do it. He said, you can't last 5 years doing something stupid like that. And then there was also very little educational material. There actually, was information about cultural controls of certain kinds of weeds, but nothing was organized in a way that it was readily available to us, and we just gradually found them as we went along. Many farmers at that time just quit chemicals and fertilizers, said no more on my farm. And we didn't understand the transition, and a lot of farmers that just quit cold turkey didn't survive the transition. It was just too much of a shock for the land to go through just to cut all that off, and then we didn't understand the management as we do now. So that set the stage of what people look down on us for trying to farm organically. So David, will you take it now to tell about the first meeting?
All right. Well, there was, I'll just kind of tell it from my perspective. I think I saw an ad in the local paper. It was an ad, I think, from Goodhart Associates, a fertilizer company. And they talked about organic agriculture, and I'd been reading and learning a little bit about organic farming, and I decided that, when I started farming, that's what I wanted to do. And so here was this meeting advertised at the Patterson Hotel in Bismarck, North Dakota in 1978, I believe. And so I and a friend went, and here there were, 30, 40, 50 people showed up. And among the farmers that were at the meeting, we were all surprised that there was even one other farmer in North Dakota thinking about farming organically. I mean, we were alone. We didn't know each other existed. So it was a great meeting just to find out that, gee, there were others that were thinking this way and doing that. And so I think Fred Kirshenman spoke at that first meeting, and kind of a pep talk, I guess. And then at the end of the day, at the end of the meeting, for those that wanted to form an organization out of the group, we met in a side room, and I don't know, maybe about 15 or 20 people in the room. And that's when we started North Dakota Natural Farmers Association. And
the purpose of the meeting wasn't to start a farmer organization either, was it? It was to find a base of clients to buy organic fertilizer.
Right. And so the Goodhart Associate people just kind of melted into the background, and because the farmers were so excited to find each other. And so that was the start of a very fast and enduring community. And I've often called the organic community my other community, which was distinct from my local community. And in many ways, it was the organic community that provided the sustenance that I needed to survive and continue on.
Thank you, David. I wasn't at the first two meetings. I wasn't at the January one or the March one, but I did join the organization in the first year and was really excited, as you said, to find that there were other people trying to do this. So as I think one of the very important things that we found in the early years of the North Dakota Natural Farmers was that we needed to share our successes, but we also needed to share our failures to try and help the other guys from not making some of the same mistakes that we had made, and because there were farmers that were failing because there just wasn't enough information, that was really an important development. And farmers aren't by nature, don't share what doesn't work. So that this was kind of out of the norm. And yet that sharing created a bond among the farmers that were doing it, and that candor led to relationships that, well, have lasted all our farming careers, and have made this organization, I think, almost unique in North Dakota. And as we discussed what was working and what wasn't, gradually we began to accumulate knowledge and understanding, and had more ideas about how to do it. Other people were joining us, although in the first 5 years of Northern Plains Sustainable Ag Society, the membership averaged 22 people. But word was getting out, and others started coming, so that eventually we had people from North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Montana, and Saskatchewan and Manitoba. And to begin with, I mean, with those few people, and we didn't have much of a budget to work with, so the farmers themselves led workshops on weed control and crop rotation and different types of machinery and things like that, and the more people that started coming, the more ideas we had to work with, and the fact that people are coming from Montana and Canada to our meeting spoke something about how meaningful these annual meetings were. And we also published North Dakota Natural Farmers published a little newsletter with stories about crop rotations and things like that. After not quite, let's see, I think it was 79. No, 79 is when we started. 86, I think, is the year that we decided that with people coming from such diverse areas, we needed to be more inclusive, and it changed the name of the organization from the North Dakota Natural Farmers to Northern Plains Sustainable Agriculture. And one of the reasons why we became interested in, well, will you show the other page of the brochure? We wrote up standards to help farmers to know what they needed to do in order to qualify as organic. And if I realize it's pretty small, but these standards, they aren't that, I mean, they're compatible with today's standards. So I think that shows sort of how ahead of the time they were. And they showed, and they were written by farmers so that it had first what was recommended and then what was not allowed, as opposed to us developing in a environment where everybody just thought of organic in terms of what we didn't do. With the growth of the organization, after it became in PSAS, very shortly we're up to like 45 or 50 people, and with more people involved, we were able to bring in speakers from outside the organization. Some were from agricultural colleges, some were, what would you describe, David, some of the speakers we had?
I don't know how you describe them, just people from other areas that, well, from our own organization, there were a lot of speakers. We
Yeah,
didn't really develop much relationship with the colleges, the land
to
grants
begin
until
with.
into
Yeah,
the 90s.
yeah.
So yeah, it was just just mostly individuals that were farmers and talking about their experiences and sharing their information.
And then as the farmer numbers of the organization was increasing, then we had people that sold organic products, um, and soil amendments and things like that, but also organic buyers that were coming to the conference because it was a chance for them to meet organic farmers and talk to them about buying their grains. So all those things coming together increased the number of things that happened at a convention.
Well, concurrently, there were organizations like our own sprouting up all over the world. And we became tied with the International Federation of Organic Agriculture movements. And that brought us extra markets into Europe and such.
And there's so many things. It's amazing how much this organization has accomplished, given the modest start that we had. And we haven't got time tonight to go into all of that, but I think one really important thing that happened was that in 19 oh, let's see, I had the date written down. I think it was about 88 or 89. Northern Plains Sustainable Agriculture got a grant from a foundation, which enabled us to publish the book that Fred Kirschenman had written about switching to a sustainable system, which really helped farmers to understand better how to make a transition into organic agriculture. And it was very well received. And I think that book has gone all over the United States.
Can I also ask you to touch on the creation of the organic certifying agency, Farm Verified Organic, because they are what birthed FARRMS, who is hosting this webinar. So we should probably touch on that.
Marketing our organic crops was really difficult to begin with, and it was one of the biggest frustrations of farmers, and it was one of the nuts that was just the absolute hardest to crack for North Dakota natural farmers. And yet the importance of certification became really obvious to us, I guess I would say, because we could see that the term natural was just being used by everybody for everything, and virtually that was becoming useless. So then it became more obvious that we needed to have standards, so that organic really did stand for something. But just because you have standards that doesn't necessarily mean that people can trust those standards. And so we had to move to certification. OCIA was one of the early certifying agencies, And Mercantile Foods was one of the buyers, and he had very close connections with a lot of people in Europe, so that Michael was one of the people, the owner of Mercantile Food, that understood that farmers had to be able to market the minor crops as well as the major crops in order to be able to get our rotations to work. And he and Fred Kirschman together came up with the idea, modeled along a lot of the European certifiers, to form Farm Verified Organic. But in order for Farm Verified Organic to really have credibility, it had to kind of move away from Mercantile Foods, so that the buyers could perceive that it wasn't just working at the whim of Mercantile Foods. And so eventually they moved the headquarters to North Dakota and set up the headquarters here. David, can you explain a little more?
Well, Terry was the one that was on the certification committee. Part of Farm Verified Organic had a certification committee. It had inspectors that went out to farms, and I did a little inspecting in the early days, and oftentimes inspectors were farmers too, and so we would often put on our educator's hat in that process, and so that helped farmers to better their farms in that way.
Serving on the certification committee too, we saw farms, different kinds of organic agriculture all over the country, which broadened our understanding of organic. I'm sorry, David, I interrupted you.
Oh, that's fine. I'm not thinking too good tonight anyway. So, yeah, Terry was one of the first certification committee members. So you could just take it from there.
It kind of evolved because the first, I was one of the certification members about, I'm thinking 2 years after it was formed. The first 2 years, they had a guy who was really knowledgeable about certification, Luke Idebrock, that came from Netherlands. And he went around and did inspections, and basically, if Luke said it was organic, it was organic. Gradually, that they kind of came to realize that they needed a separate group, the certification committee, to make the rulings, and the inspector couldn't also make the call on whether the farms were organic. And I was one of the people recruited to be on that committee. And usually we had 2 European certifiers that also served on the committee. Fred was on the committee, and eventually David was on the committee. And you know, I think that it was probably substantially Fred's influence, but Annie maybe was part of it too. Came to realize that there needed to be an educational wing to the Farm Verified Organic as well, and that led to the establishment of FARRMS. But that wasn't, I wasn't very much involved in that. I was involved in more the making the calls and talking about standards and crop rotations and things like that.
I think the one person we haven't mentioned that should be mentioned is Teresa Poto. She
Mhm.
a lot of the she fought a lot of the battles with me. She was our executive director for many years. There's a lady that could put a program, an education, help put an educational program together. I spent a lot of time with Teresa. We talked a lot. We talked a lot. She still is somebody I look up to. She was a great lady. I would call her the first lady outside of Janet or some of the organic movement. She was very instrumental, very instrumental. So it
And,
wasn't all men.
and Brad, that brings up a point. North Dakota or North Dakota Sustainable Ag or the NPSAS did not have an auxiliary. The women were equal partners in the organization, and they could hold offices. When we had the first women on the board examined the issues more holistically once there was also women on the board. So your point is very well taken, Brad.
One thing I want you to touch on before we finish talking about the history is if you would just briefly talk about the My Neighbor's Acre program, because it's such a great example of this community of support.
Well, I think the original idea about My Neighbor's Acres was Carolyn Raffensperger's, wasn't it?
I think that's right.
Yeah, and it was during a time, I don't remember the timeline, but it was during a time when, there were a lot of struggling farmers among our membership. And so she said, well, why don't we just devote an acre of profits off of our farms and put it into a fund administered by the NPSAS board. And just the funds were there for farmers to tap in freely if they, needed to, it wasn't a big amount of money, but if they needed to buy some food or some medicine or whatever for their families, something for their kids, then it was available. And so they could pay it back or not. It was all just a free loan without any sort of interest or of any sort of expectations.
Didn't they also get a grant from some foundation to help us get some seed money to get started?
I think they did, but I wasn't too familiar with that. I don't know if I was on the board at that time or not. So
The historical documents I read referred to, I think, is the Jesse Noyes Foundation, which I believe is an entity that Fred Kirschenman had connections with.
yes, Jesse Smith Noyes Foundation. Yeah.
And David and I have both said that the amounts weren't big, but they meant so much to the people that received them, and they didn't have to prove that they were an inadequate human being in order to get it. If they came or a friend came and said, Joe Blow needs some money so that he can get groceries for his family, they got it. And so it wasn't demeaning to the people that received the help. And I thought that was inspiring too.
We're going to start by giving Steve and Kasim and Greta an opportunity to introduce themselves, and then we're going to have a discussion. I have some questions prepared for the panel about how they've seen the organic movement change over time, what they see for the future of organic agriculture, and any advice they have for those interested in pursuing organic agriculture. So let's start with Steve. Would you tell us a bit about yourself and your organic career?
Sure. My name is Steve Zwinger, and I live in central North Dakota, Carrington, North Dakota. And I'll kind of have a few different paths here that I've taken. But basically, I worked at the Carrington Research Center for a little over 40 years doing crop research. The last 25 of those years at the research center, I started doing organic research and developed a program that really wasn't called a program yet, so it was kind of under the radar, but did organic research for about 25 years and focused mainly on field crops such as the farmers in North Dakota or that area were planting, but also tried to diversify and give as much information as I could. So I did a little bit of vegetable research, worked on cover crops, production management type things, trying to give some answers to the organic farmers through statistical sound research, and which is something that they really didn't have a lot of information on, as Terry talked about earlier, and David too, so let's see. So yeah, and then I also in the last 25 years have farmed organically as my second job, so to speak. And there I mainly grew vegetables and also worked on small scale vegetable seed production and stuff and provided organic seed through seed companies and stuff. So my experience there was, again, working on small scale. And I think one of the things that, is really great about some of the opportunities in organic is you can be a larger scale farmer, although it doesn't lend to where you can farm on a smaller scale with limited acres and high value, whether it's vegetables or vegetable seed production. And those options are obviously there in conventional, but I think they're much greater in organic, and also the diversity of crops that organic agriculture will look at as compared to conventional. With that, that's basically my introduction for myself, and thank you.
And I'm going to call on Kasim next, because Kasim occupies the role that Steve retired from. So Kasim, would you introduce yourself?
Thank you. So my name is Kasim Khan. I'm at the Carrington Research Center currently, and started my current role as an organic cropping system agronomist since last September. But I have extensive experience in agronomy and crop production. Originally, when I came to US, I came as a plant breeder. My master degree was in plant breeding, did canola agronomy, and then I worked with wheat breeding for 7-8 years at Colorado State University, and then I joined the Montana State University after that. And I work for competitive abilities, where we look at the wheat competition against wild oat, like what specific trait or characters are in the crop that can make them more competitive against weeds. Then I work with cropping systems, where we did crop rotation, try to replace the fallow period with cover crops or for pulses. I have extensive work done on since 2014 on the cover crops and things, and under irrigated and dryland conditions there. And then last 5 years, the people who has done, the farmers who have been involved in conventional and changing to organic, my experience with conventional was like that. We are coming to a point where, if I go back just briefly, in 60s and 70s, when these new technologies start becoming available, like fertilizer and herbicides and all that, there is changed the production tremendously, so people was not having those problems that they were having. But after 50 years of completely relying on that one, just specifically on herbicide or just fertilizer, too much use of that. Now look at 2025, for the last few years, we are at a point where the solution, herbicide and fertilizer, was the solution for the crop production to increase yield. They are now the problem of agriculture. So if you look at that, the herbicide resistance that coming up. So if we keep going this path, we don't have we will have to change something. So we have to come back to sustainable agriculture. and organic is a sustainable agriculture. So last 5, 6 years ago, I wanted to convert some of the land at the experiment station where I was into organic, grow some perennial crops and see how it changed the soil health. So we didn't do that much extensively, but then I was looking the opportunity to get into organic agriculture. My interest was increased in that, and I see that the demand is increasing. It's promising field, and if hearing the history, we have come to a long way. So I would say the future is very bright for organic. And so, but it has challenges. And my two biggest goal in this role is, provide the best management practices for the organic farmers, address what their needs are. And there's many needs like varieties. We don't have varieties for organic, or tillage is a big issue for weeds control. I like to work on the tillage problems, have some reduced tillage, and solve the soil health problem with crop rotation and perennial crops, or with crop rotation. So these are some of my bigger goals are. And North Dakota is lucky in the way that the number of crop choices are huge here. For example, in Montana, where in the eastern Montana you go, the main crops are wheat. Wheat fallow system is pretty much practiced. If you are lucky to have irrigated, you have sugar beet industry there, you can grow sugar beets. But if you are in North Dakota, your choice of crops a lot bigger. You can grow all the warm season, you can grow cool season crops. Pulses are here, and pulses are actually becoming a very important crop even in Montana in the last 20 years. So I see a big future for organic, and as a for farmers, a lot of crop choices. So I'm excited to be here, and I have actually enjoyed this seminar, this talk with firsthand, like for the people that have experienced this firsthand and were the pioneer in that of thing. So that is one of the really exciting thing for me to sit here and then listen to the stories. And you don't get that much opportunities to hear firsthand from the folks that who were part of that. So thank you for everybody who shared the story and for your time.
Thank you, Kasim. And Greta, we'd like to hear from you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Greta Gramig. I'm a professor at NDSU in Fargo. I've been there for 17 years. I was trained as a weed scientist. I studied plant science at Montana State University and UW-Madison. When I was at Madison, I remember hearing Fred Kirschenman speak at a symposium. That made a big impression on me. I also had a background in organic gardening and herbal medicine. And when I came to NDSU, there was a lot of weed scientists at NDSU, and they were already doing all the work in conventional systems. And I met Pat Carr, who was at Dickinson at the time, and Steve, and started doing some research with them in organic systems, and just sort of continued in that path. And right now I've got a project that was funded by one of the USDA's organic programs, the OREI, and we're looking at developing biodegradable spray-on mulches to replace plastics in organic horticultural production. It's a really big problem. All the plastics that are used in that industry, and people are really wanting some alternatives. So that's mostly what I've been working on. I have a fair amount of experience working with those USDA organic research programs, both the OREI and organic transitions. I've served on panels and managed a panel for organic transitions for 3 years. So very familiar with those programs and what they're looking for. And so I come from the research side of things. And that's about it.
Thank you, Greta. So I'm going to So first I want to talk about, we've talked about this a little bit, but what motivates you all to choose this form of agriculture or research, and why did you stick with it? And I'm going to go to Steve. why did you start farming organically, and why do you continue?
Well, why did I start? Because I guess I always, from even a young kid or whatever, just felt that the soil, was alive and natural. And as I saw pesticides being used, I just didn't like that, you know. And so a lot of my experience started in gardening, and then you saw things there, how, there was life and how things interacted. And in particular, too, a healthy soil does make food that tastes better. And I think directly growing and eating what you produce, and then in this case, my case too, selling vegetables directly to people, when they make comments to you about it and that they like it, that really makes a difference. And when you feel good about eating your food, that makes a difference. And so you connect all those dots. I think David, he's always said this, and he said it earlier, and I think we should always remember that, how the garden is really the center of the farm. And we don't think about that as much as we did in the past. When I say in the past, like when we first settled this, the garden was the substance. That was where the farm sustained itself. And then the rest, after that, it grew other food to market and stuff. But I guess that's why I farmed, was because, again, I had things that didn't have a lot of pesticides on it, and I wanted to keep it that way. I saw the soil structure was better. It wasn't blowing away. Why did I do research? I guess you could say the same thing. I saw there was a need for research, and in particular, we still only have at this point in time 2 university NDSU people that do organic research. Have a couple different plots of land at other places, so the amount of effort is still very small compared to what conventional ag gets. And one point I want to bring out about research is, if we would have been doing more biological, organic, sustainable research, or whatever you want to call it, I always call it biological because organic is biology. If we would have spent more time looking at crop rotations and how, intercropping and other factors, organic agriculture would be so much further ahead. There's really a lot of the research was really learned by the farmers, and other places of the country is starting to get more research going, but it's still, it isn't as much as what conventional is. And so I guess that's why I did it, and again, it's the soil. It preserves the soil, it keeps the soil healthy.
It had to help too that you had John Gardner to work with.
Well, definitely, John Gardner was the person that, yeah, he was my mentor. He was the person that hired me. And you're exactly right.
Oh, fantastic. I want to stay on this topic a little bit, because the title of tonight's webinar is the why of organic, and I know you all are philosophical people as well. So Greta, I'd like to hear from you. What motivated you, and continues to motivate you, to focus specifically on organic?
Well, when I was in high school, I read Silent Spring, and I think that had a big impact on me. And like I mentioned, when I was in grad school, I heard Fred speak, and that really made a big impression on me as well. And then as a weed scientist, one of the biggest problems that organic farmers contend with is weeds. And so I felt like I had something to offer there in terms of my the niche of my profession, that I could do research on weed management and organic systems. It wasn't something that NDSU and Fargo was addressing specifically, and yet our farmers do pay taxes and pay into the system. So I just wanted to get involved with them and work in organics.
Fantastic.
Related to that, I have a story. Working with certification, we often saw that the women in the family were ready and wanted the farm to be organic about 5 years ahead of their husbands. And their husbands' primary reticence was they were worried about what the neighbors would think about the amount of weeds they had.
On a related note, I've had farmers tell me, gosh, I'd really like to work with you, but I'm afraid you're going to make weedy messes on my farm. I tell them, I probably would. Just have to have weeds to study them.
No, I just want to throw a quick story out there too. You know, when I got into the soil health, or I said that's what the reason a lot of it is, an amount of diversity you see. Of the organic, I started getting land transitioned at the research center to organic plot ground. You know, so obviously you can't do research. It's always hard to do research for the organic person because it takes you 4 years to get the land there. Anyway, so after 10 years into it, or whatever the case may be, we were planting potatoes. And that particular day, one of the soils members was helping. And when we were planting the potatoes, and the person looked down and said, "What are all these earthworms?" She had been on the farm sampling all spring and hadn't saw earthworm yet. And so I thought that was a kind of unique thing, to where, you know, it was very visual that people could notice the difference on a little 4-acre plot, you know, in comparison. So, I mean, taking those 4 acres at first and putting it in the middle of all the conventional ground was really an eye-opener, because it was amazing, even there, how much more diversity you could see in insects, and even above ground wildlife and stuff. It was very noticeable.
Just to add to that, to what Steve said, is that, you know, growing food and getting higher yield, that most of the focus is for the commercial agriculture. But when you grow organic, you get the high nutrition there, because when you grow these crops, when your soil's biology is active, there are certain nutrients and micronutrients that become available to the crop. So the grains are a lot more healthy and more nutritious, actually.
Well, I think I'll probably come back to this one because it's a good question, but I also want to hear from Terry. Terry, can you talk a little bit about how you've seen the organic movement change over time?
In the early years when we were doing it, both David and I have commented on how it was the farmers that were having to figure out things by trial and error. And when you're figuring out by trial and error, there's more errors than there is successes to begin with. So one of the things we learned early on was, and really promoted it, was when you're experimenting, do it on a small scale rather than a great big field. Because when you're experimenting, you don't want to jeopardize the whole farm by this experiment that you're doing, but you have to have a plot of land to do it in real life. So learning on a small scale is an important part of getting new information. I guess there's another, since we were talking about weeds, I would also point out that another thing that we learned was that in organic, you aren't trying to totally eliminate the weeds on the farm. That we're just trying to manage it so that the weeds don't drastically impact our crops. That leads to a different kind of management, and it leads to a farmer having to have some tolerance for weeds, but weeds add to the diversity, and so they can be part of the soil building as well. I think that as we have gained information about how to do it and develop the philosophy and understanding of why things work, we have a lot more sources for helping beginning farmers to make a transition, in a successful transition into organic. For instance, the 36-month transition rule, it's not just that the farm has to make a 36-month transition to become more biologically active and get evolved to be feed the crops from within the resources of the farm, the way it did when it was prairie. To, with a conventional system, it's a business approach to farming, and so you have a problem, you buy a solution. It's very linear, where an organic system is using one system of the farm, maybe the livestock, for instance, to provide manure that fertilizes the crops. You have a poor crop, it's not a total waste. You can feed it to the animals, and you can weave crop rotations, early seed plants, late seed plants, to keep weeds. But it's a management of managing systems. And so the farmer's mind has to go through a transition as well, and it probably is longer than 36 months. But you need to even approach problems differently in order to find solutions and successfully do it. So that, it for a while, farmers kind of resented certification, or because you're telling me what to do and I have to do all this paperwork, and how does paperwork help with the farming? But I think farmers have come to realize that the paperwork, the certification, is part of the added value that they get for the organic crops that they raise. So that there's been a gradual change from the early years to where we are now. Farmers are, I think, more accepting of certification. And also, if we hadn't, it was a bitter discussion among farmers in the early years of whether or not we should support the federal government getting into organic. And there are downsides to it. On the other hand, organic still means something because we did. And so that it is a very important part of the development, and I guess that's a difference between early times but in the North Dakota Farmers Organization, we realized pretty early that we had to have standards and had to have something that said what organic is, because natural very quickly didn't mean anything. I also think David talked about philosophy. I think the Northern Plains Sustainable Ag Society was the most philosophical of any of the organic farmer groups that I met when I was traveling around as part of, the leadership for NPSAS. And part of the reason was because David has a philosophical tendencies. Fred Kirschenman did, I do. But that philosophy was really important to us in the early years because it was really believing in the philosophy that helped us get through the disappointments, get over the hard learning curve to get to something that was better. And so the philosophy was really important to an important ingredient in our survival or success. Organic farming is less about purchased solutions. And I think in the future, one of the ways that make organic safer than conventional agriculture is that we control our input costs to a much greater extent. We still buy diesel fuel, still buy seed and things like that, but we don't have these high input costs, so that by controlling your costs, even though your crop sizes may not be as large, getting a premium price and then not have such a high cost of production is actually makes organic safer in an economic sense, not just in a chemical sense. I had trouble remembering your name. Is it Quabrine?
Oh, Kasim?
Huh?
Are you addressing Kasim, our researcher?
Yeah, Kasim talked about there are a lot of problems inherent in conventional agriculture. They're having to go to harsher and harsher chemicals. And so in some ways, one might say conventional agriculture has the seeds of its own destruction within it. And so in more erratic climate, and then with weeds adapting to chemicals, I think that actually increases the advantage that farming has too, especially given the expense of the chemicals. And when you're working hard to take care of the soil absorbs water better. It holds water better. And so a healthy organic soil, the crop is more tolerant of weather extremes because that base and the ability of the soil to provide the nutrients and to provide moisture, because it is more porous and can hold water. Again, that increases the adaptability of sustainable agriculture to the inevitability of climate change. So I too am optimistic. I see more people involved in organic agriculture now that are involved in it for the economics and not just for it being a way of life. And I'm sad to see that, but I think that is also a fact of modern agriculture. We're making it much easier we've solved a lot of the problems, and they can do it a little bit more like a recipe than I think it should be.
Brad, we haven't heard from you in a little bit, and you played a role in developing North Dakota's organic support systems. getting it into NDSU, and you mentioned the Organic Advisory Board with the North Dakota Department of Ag. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you've seen the organic movement change over time, and what you see for the future.
Okay, I guess if I have to talk about this, and they say that I think the reason that I was a spokesperson for the organic movement, not because I understood the organic movement the best, is because I lived and operated in that world, and I wasn't easily intimidated. Um, I think that the things that I see is when Terry and David and Steve and we got into this business, we were kind of the odd people out. We were not accepted within the fellowship of man in some circles, and it was just a hard thing. And the first thing that we had to overcome that we had to get off the kids' table and join the adult table in the room, okay? And that was the biggest challenge that I fought in my career, was that this is a legitimate organic system. This system we can make money in. This is a system that's good for the environment. This is a system you proclaim to be sustainable. You proclaim to want soil health, but are you actually doing it? And this is why the last 10 years of my career, guess what? I morphed into soil health. Well, was that a surprise? Probably not, because of my background. You need to be, in order to make an organic system work, you have to be inquisitive. You have to want to figure things out, because one decision impacts your next decision, and your next decision impacts your next decision. And that's what really attracted me to organic farming, because it forces you to figure out your ecological system. And I use many of the same things in soil health that I got out of organic. It's the same thing. If you want to improve the soil, you got to understand what makes the mycorrhizae work, what makes a bacteria work, what affects earthworms, what affects organic matter, what destroys organic matter, what burns things, what makes soil sterile. These are all things that are not taught at your local ag chemical dealership meeting. I mean, yeah, Terry, you're absolutely right. I have a hard time sitting there sometimes, but and I can do it too, because I was in Walsh County, potato sugar beet country. And if I can survive in potato sugar beet country, and they thought I was a pretty cool guy when I left, because I was helping them with a lot of their soil health problems. But I never converted them to organic, but
No, no. Some hills are too steep.
But you need to be fascinated. And David, and one of the things I really loved and respect about you, you were always a thinker. You were always a philosophical giant. You were always the one I looked up to keep myself true, okay? And we need people like you too.
I'm going to jump ahead to David. I want to return to the question about the philosophical underpinnings of what motivates you, because I know that you probably have some really, really great things to say about this. David, what has motivated you to farm organically and to continue on that path, even when it got hard?
Well, I'm going to tell a story that I hadn't thought about for a long time, and when I first was reading, I grew up conventional farm, part of the FFA program in the local school. All the emphasis was on conventional agriculture. Of course, there wasn't any other agriculture. The stuff of the past was gone, and now we're in this new age. And so my parents got a magazine called Prevention from, it was written by, it was a part of the Rodale system. But old J.I. Rodale, he wrote an editorial every month, and he talked about this thing called organic farming. And I would read that and I thought, oh, what a bunch of crap, when I was in high school. And, but then when I had the opportunity to start farming, I've been thinking about what J.R. Rodale was writing, and I was going to prove him wrong. And so I spent a whole winter in study. And one of the things that I read was The Nature and Properties of Soils. It's a standard soils text. I think it's still used today. And I had a friend who was also studying it as a part of a college class. And I said, well, boy, there's some really great stuff about chapters on organic matter and life in the soil. And he said, well, we didn't cover that. So that was already not on the radar. So the more I read, and I mentioned some of the earlier things that I was reading, and the more I convinced myself that J.I. Rodale had it right. And so I told my dad, well, I was going to farm organically. And he let me do it. He didn't, he just let me do it. And so at a steep learning curve, but everything worked out. But I was going to say too, that among those farmers at the first meeting that we had in Bismarck, I think one of the common things is that we had some intuitive sense. We didn't have any research backing, even stuff that we did ourselves. I mean, it was all new. But there was an intuitive sense that the type of agriculture that had become prominent after World War II, and really not until the 1960s, there was something wrong there, that this wasn't the way we should be doing it. And there had to be a better way. And maybe part of that sense was our agrarian nature. But I think that's what, and then the whole nutritional thing, like Steve mentioned, we're eating that food. We're using these poisons. Well, I read, what the book that Greta mentioned, I'm sorry.
Silent Spring.
Yeah, Silent Spring. And, everything just kind of fit together. And so it's been quite a journey, meeting all these other great folks and eventually training some extension people even, and then to learn and such. But yeah, that's it's been a wonderful journey. I've learned a heck of a lot, and you never stop learning either. There's still always more to learn about the workings of nature.
Absolutely. Because it's 7:46, I want to make sure we have time for any questions from the audience. So I'm going to open it up to you all in the audience for questions right now.
Bombarded them with a lot of information.
Oh, Catherine Roth is asking about the Neighbor's Acre program. She's asking where it's located, but I think the first question is it still operating?
I don't know the answer to that.
What organization we talk about?
My Neighbor's Acre with NPSAS.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been out of it for a while too.
Terry, that's a good question. I should know the answer, but I don't. um, that will get found out.
Um, but maybe a little bit of additional information. Northern Plains Sustainable Ag Society is still operating. Steve, I think you're on their board of directors.
Yes.
Do you want to just say a few words in summary, you know, what they're doing today, the conference, seed breeding club?
Sure. Okay. Northern Plains Sustainable Ag Society is still an active organization. Membership is down, as is common amongst many organizations and things right now. Still hold a winter conference and a number of tours each year. The winter conference is probably probably the biggest thing that's been brought up. It is, you know, the faces are changing a little bit. I mean, because some of the founding fathers, you know, are older. Some, you know, anyway. But it is community. It's definitely community. As far as going, you know, it's been brought up here. But as far as the conferences, it actually has events for children and stuff like that, so it welcomes all ages. So the organization again is I'll just say similar to FARRMS. There's no brick and mortar building. You know, it's everything's done remotely and things like that. But again, the organization is still it has saw, you know, less members and stuff in the last few years, and the conference is down a little bit, but it's still a viable organization that is you know, trying to find its way in this new era too. Of one thing to throw off too, as this is considered TOPS money, as what Stephanie talked about too. We are also doing some education and stuff through the TOPS funding, Northern Plains. So yes, you know, again, you know, it as it was mentioned, you know, and stuff. It's that grassroots organization. You know, the farm. You know, at least three to five farms a year are you know, toured and such, and so it's a great learning experience. A good way to share information and stuff.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve. So I have a few questions in reserve, so I'll ask those, but if you have questions, put them in the chat and I'll make sure we cover them. I wanted to hear from the group what advice you have for new organic farmers. And I'm going to direct this one to David, if you are willing to take another question.
Yes. Got to put my glasses on here, look at my notes. I've got several things that I have learned that have been really important in my journey with organic agriculture. And this is the one I will always focus on. I did this when I taught the Organic 101 class for FARRMS, is observe, observe, observe. Take time to look at things, ponder, and reason why, you know, and write down these things. You know, we're required to keep certain records for organic certification, but you know what I also did with those records is I had a notebook, kept my field records on one side of the page, and on the other side of the page I would make notes all summer long. You know, what I saw, what I thought the problem might be, what the answer might be, what I need to watch on that field for the next year. And so then I'd go back and review those things. So keeping good records is just really, really important. It's almost like keeping a journal of your farming journey. You know, farming is an art. You know, you paint a new canvas every year, and you get to do this your whole life long. Man, what an opportunity, what an experience. And like Terry said, you know, this is fun. It's a lot more fun doing this sort of thing. Develop a good rotation. This is critical to weed and fertility management. You just got to develop a good rotation. And the first well, before I even started farming organically, or maybe it was the first year in, that's one of the things I did is put a rotation plan down on paper. And then I started that the next year. And I kept that same rotation plan for almost 20 years. It worked really, really well, but it was very thought out from all the stuff that I had read. And Terry mentioned this too. Organic farming is not a recipe. Each farm is unique. You know, experimenting is inevitable. Just don't put your farm in jeopardy by doing it on a small acreage. And so, but then there's the focus, the main focus on everything you do, all the crops you plant, all the things you do. Save organic matter, add organic matter, save it, don't burn it up. Learn what it takes to create stable humus. So I guess those are my main points.
And your point about crop rotation, I think, is so important because personally, I feel crop rotation is the most powerful tool that an organic farmer has, but it takes a long time to figure out all the different ways to use it.
Well, and then there are always changes with weather, you know, and so, but, you know, an organic system tends to be more resilient as well. So, you know, but like I said, every farm is unique, and farmers have to work that out for themselves.
I guess if I was going to give some advice here, and I come from more of the academic side, and I've read books since I learned to read. Read good books. Discuss those books. Discuss those ideas with the people that you can discuss them with. You can't discuss some of these ideas with everybody, obviously, but seek to understand. No recipes here. Seek to understand the system. Seek to understand what your goals are. Seek to understand what's the strength of your crop, what's the weaknesses of your pests. Exploit them. But you have to, what really, really, really attracted me in this system because it made me think. It humbled me so many days, but it made me think, and it made me a better person because now I can stand in front of a group of sugar beet farmers and I can tell them why they need to do strip till. And that sometimes can be a daunting task. You really got to know your stuff when you're going to do that stuff.
Just to add one thing here is for the beginning farmers, you know, the transition period is important. And as Brad also mentioned that, you know, get yourself educated well, and then the crop rotation is, you know, very important. And so I have some interest into research, seeing like when you're transitioning, what kind of crops would be beneficial depending on what you wanted to do. Like if you have a wheat pressure going into the organic, or you have a poor soil that you want to improve, you know, while you're transitioning to organic. For each problem, there could be a different type of crop rotations or different kind of approaches could be. So I'm interested in those kind of research. So if you are transitioning and you want to put aside a little bit area to do a different crop just for testing, I'll be very interested in that. So I think Stephanie maybe have the contact information for all of us. I think you can probably get the contact information from this meeting.
Interestingly, you're talking about problem soils, and problem soils often make the most dramatic response to organic management.
Yeah.
So before I wrap up, I want to see if Greta has any final words, advice, or philosophy.
I have a question.
I really don't have anything to add. I think that people who have been farming, I'm not a farmer, I'm a research scientist, but I would echo the things that people have been talking about. So, but thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Greta. Terry?
I have a question for Greta.
Yeah.
Do you have access to literature from Manitoba agriculture? The reason I ask is that in my search for how to deal with weeds, I found more bulletins on cultural practices to cope with weeds out of Manitoba agriculture than I ever found out of USDA. And that was a long time ago that I did that, so I don't know if those bulletins are still available now or if they aren't. But
I don't know anything
like the
about that.
21-day tillage on Canada thistle to control them came out of a. I think there's a USDA bulletin on that too, but I could not find it.
Yeah. Well, I could believe that they have good literature. I have met organic farmers from Manitoba, guys that were, farming on a really large scale and doing it organically. But I haven't read those bulletins myself.
Well, thank you, everyone, for sharing
Can
your
we close on? Can we close with a poem, Stephanie?
Yes, I have a few important things I want to share, and then maybe we could close out with a poem after that. So I want everyone to know we're happy to share the slides from tonight and the reading list. We also have an organic resource guide that we have put together through this project. And yes, are you looking at the organic resource guide? Great. As well as a YouTube playlist with recordings of previous organic webinars. You received some resources in the email that was sent to you that includes a guide for organic crop producers and some information about practices. I especially want to let you know about the OCIA mentorship program because they are the ones who fund these webinars. Those who are organic producers can get paid a stipend for mentoring beginning producers, and beginning producers can benefit from the wisdom of experienced organic growers. Yes, I also, tonight we talked about the community of organic growers learning from each other and working together. And like NPSAS, that is FARRMS' mission, is to build that community and help farmers learn from each other. So visit us at farrms.org. FARRMS has 2 R's, where you can find a directory to find local food producers across North Dakota. We publish an annual farmer calendar, and we have a farm beginnings course where we help beginning farmers understand how to use these practices that we discussed tonight, looking at the farm as a system, being inquisitive, observing. We also put on many other webinars like this, as well as we do have a lending program to provide financial resources to farmers as they're starting out. So I encourage you to visit us at farrms.org, and I encourage you to join us again on March 17th to learn from even more local organic growers about the certification process, and on March 31st to learn tips and tricks from organic growers for record keeping. And with that, thank you for joining us tonight. And Terry is going to close us out with one of his poems. Terry is the poet laureate for the Northern Plains Sustainable Ag Society.
Okay. A call. An act of faith. not brave, not foolish, organic farming, as personal response to God's call for stewardship, working with God's creation rather than against it, surviving by the subtleties of life, the profound complexity of creation, seeing the Word through His creation, to live by serving the land, the animals, the microbiology I can't even see, and people with healthy food. A dynamic system, alive and complex. There is no other way for me to farm.